In the previous episodes, we learned about the ways by which the manuscripts of Hebrew and Greek original text preserved and copied in order to make the current modern Bible. The book that we all have at home and also digitally available these days to carry around in our smartphones, the Bible. In this episode, we will learn about the origin of Bible in India, how it got into a country that is multilingual, pluricultural, and multi-ethnic nation. When we think about Christianity in India, we often misunderstand it with the tedious work of British colonialism. But the roots of Christianity in India is pretty deep, that it began much before British India. Yes, even before the Portuguese and French came into the Dravidian lands, even before Thomas, the disciple of Jesus, also known as Saint Thomas, aka Marthoma, came to the coast of Malabar in Kerala. The roots of ancient biblical teachings in India are too deep and old that it dates back to even before the birth of Judeo-Christian Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth in Bethlehem. Now, that may be a little surprising to hear, so let's dive into that. Christianity is a religion that has its roots deep down into the teachings and beliefs of Jewish community. So before the early Christian Reformation happened all over the world, it is believed that the early Jewish community who followed the Torah of the Hebrew Bible or the laws of Moses were sailors and merchants who came to the Dravidian lands now known as Kerala. So they came as the early Jewish settlers during King Solomon's ruling period on Israel. It has been claimed that following the siege of Solomon's temple, also called the First Temple of Jerusalem, was destructed by the Babylonian Empire led by Nebuchadnezzar II. During that time, some Jewish exiles came to India somewhere in between 589 BC to 587 BC. And they were the second batch of Jewish settlers in India. Later, after the crucifixion of Jesus on year 70 Anno Domini, the Jewish-Roman War resulted in the destruction of the Second Temple, and over 1 million people died in and out of Jerusalem. Jewish people who survived the war were imprisoned by the Romans, and some of them were forced to become gladiators. Remaining few fled to Mediterranean regions, and some of them fled to other countries as Jewish refugees. And some of them came to India, to the coastal region of Cranganore, now known as Kodungallur in Kerala. Now, before the third batch of Jewish came to India as refugees, Thomas, an Aramaic-speaking Jew from Galilee region of Israel, and one of the disciples of Jesus came to South India in the 1st century. Disciple Thomas, the Apostle, or also known as Saint Thomas. In the local language of Aramaic and Malayalam, he is more known as Marthoma. So Thomas came to Muziris, which is modern-day North Paravur in Kerala. So he came to the South Indian state of Kerala on AD 52. So it is claimed that the Jewish colonies in India paved a way for Thomas to come to India, to teach them the gospel and to introduce them to the Jewish Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth. Later, the early Christians were the so-called converted Jewish Christians who were taught by Thomas the Apostle. At that time, the common term Christians were not coined or used in India to call the people who followed the Christ. So in order to give them a different identity apart from the traditional Jewish community, early Christians were called with the name Nasrani, followers of Yeshu Natsari. So Nasrani in English means followers of Nazarene. Nazarene, also known as Jesus of Nazareth. There are a lot of stories in Kerala, Kodungallur about Thomas, that he was invited by the king of Cochin Kingdom for a wedding. He sang Hebrew songs to the people there, and he lived with the Jewish in Kodungallur for years. Thomas made Kerala's famous Pesaha Appam, or steamed rice cake, for the Lord's Supper, and a lot of other stories which are passed generation to generation by the Jewish as well as the early Christians who lived there. Thomas spoke Aramaic language to teach the gospel, hence he quoted everything in Syriac, which is a dialect of Aramaic, and these teachings were later recorded in the form of scriptures by the early Christians. From that, the Syrian Thomas Bible came into existence. So the Syrian Thomas Bible were followed by the Nasranis who lived there. Later, through Thomas, a new sect came into existence, famously known as the Marthomites or the Marthoma Church, established by the Thomas. Later, Saint Thomas established other churches in the state, which were altogether 7 church communities in Kerala and 3 other church communities in the neighboring state of Tamil Nadu. So these 7 church communities in Kerala is at Kodungallur, Palayur, Paravur, Kogamangalam, Niranam, Neelakkal, Kollam and Thiruvidamkod. These churches were established in between 52 AD to 60 AD. Then later these churches turned into massive church infrastructures, and it is still there. You may go to Kerala and see them. Later these St. Thomas Christians were also called with several other names like Syrian Christians of India, Nasrani or Malabar Nasrani or Malankara Nasrani or Nasrani Mapila and so on. But this sect was known with the name Marthomites or Syrian Marthomite churches or Syro-Malabar, Syro-Malankara churches. After establishing these churches in and out of Kerala, Thomas was allegedly martyred at a mountain in Madras, which is modern-day Chennai. Later that mountain was named as St. Thomas Mount. Now, years after the death of Thomas the Apostle, somewhere in the Middle East region in present-day Syria, the Syriac Orthodox Church, which follows the Patriarchate of Antioch, follows its own version of the Bible known as the Peshitta Bible. We discussed the Peshitta translation in the previous episodes, so please do check that. So this Peshitta Bible or Syrian Biblical Translation was compiled at the end of the 3rd century CE. Over centuries, many of the older Syrian biblical versions were lost or destroyed due to the invasions and political changes in the Middle Eastern regions. Also, it played havoc with the followers of the Syrian Christians to let them out of their own land and force them to emigrate. A number of valuable texts were destroyed during that time. And then sometimes between the 9th and 12th centuries, in the remote region of Tur Abdin, on the border of the present-day Turkey and Syria, someone prepared a copy of the Syriac Bible and dispatched it to India. We really don't know who wrote it, or why it was written, and who brought it to India. Perhaps it was done to protect the Holy Book, given the threats Christians faced in that region. So this is how the Syriac Bible from Tur Abdin first came into the possession of the Jacobite Syrian Christian Church, or famously known as the Yakoba Syrian Church in Kerala. So that church existed since the work of St. Thomas in Kerala. So they received this Bible from Tur Abdin and they added it with the St. Thomas teaching or the scriptures and turned it to today's Peshitta or Peshitta translation or Vishuddha Grandham in Malayalam translation. So for centuries, the community and their churches lived on the coast of Malabar in Kerala. All of a sudden, in 1498, the Portuguese under Vasco da Gama arrived on the Malabar coast, and with them they brought Roman Catholic missionaries. The Portuguese were determined to convert the Syrian Christians to Roman Catholicism, so this would take a more sinister turn under Alexio de Menezes. Alexio de Menezes became the Archbishop of Goa in 1559 CE. Alexio de Menezes felt that the defiance and bold authority of the Syrian Christians arose from their own interpretation of the Bible and that these heretical texts need to be destroyed. As a part of larger plan or conspiracy, in June 1599 CE, de Menezes called for a religious conference known as Synod of Diaspora or Council of Diaspora. Diaspora is also known as Udayamperur. It is a village in the Kingdom of Cochin. With religious political strength and the armed might of Portuguese, all the priests and clerics of the Syrian Christian churches in Kerala were called to attend this council. They were also instructed to bring with them all their theological literature in order to remove the errors in the Syrian Christian Bible or the St. Thomas Bible. It was decreed that any church that did not follow these orders would be destroyed at this council. So all the copies of the Syrian Bible along with other Syrian Aramic manuscripts were declared heretical and ordered to be burned in this council by the Catholic leaders. Before the horrified Syrian Christian officials had time to react, the deed had been done. This was followed by the destruction of the great library of the Syrian church at Angamali near Kochi. Thus, almost all the historical literature of the Syrian Christians were destroyed by the Portuguese in 1599 CE. It is believed that, maybe by fate, only a single manuscript of the Syriac Bible survived. Author and journalist K.R.N. Swami in his book Mughals, Maharajas and Mahatma writes how the invitation to the council had not reached one of the remote mountain church in central Malabar, where actually this Bible was kept. This surviving copy later became a treasured possession of the Syrian church in India, and only a very few in the top echelons of the church knew where it was hidden. In 1806, a British missionary named Claudius Buchanan came to Malabar to study the history of the Syrian Christians. Here he struck up a friendship with Mar Dionysius, the head of the Malankara church at Angamali, and in 1807 Mar Dionysius showed him his rare Bible manuscript, which was in a very brittle condition due to the hot and humid climate of the Malabar. So Claudius Buchanan managed to convince the church leaders to translate the Bible into Malayalam and get it printed so it could be preserved for the future generation to come. The church leaders were in a dilemma that just a decade earlier Tipu Sultan invaded Malabar and had led to a new wave of destruction of churches and their libraries. So they were not sure how long they would be able to protect this manuscript as well. So Claudius Buchanan convinced that printing it was the only way to preserve it for the coming generation. Hence, the church gifted this rare Syriac Bible to Reverend Buchanan. The manuscript was translated into Malayalam by a Syriac scholar named Kayamkulam Philippos Ramban, and then later it was printed in Bombay in 1811. This was the first book ever printed in the Malayalam language and known as the Ramban Bible. Later, Reverend Claudius Buchanan donated the original Syriac Bible along with 25 other Syriac manuscripts to the University of Cambridge in England in 1809. This Bible has proved to be very important for historians and scholars in order to understand the evolution of the Holy Book over centuries. Considering the fact that the Bible was first printed in India only in the 18th century, the Buchanan Bible would have been the oldest known Bible in India had it remained here in India. Today, the Syrian Christian Bible manuscripts are preserved in the vaults of Cambridge University libraries. Despite its significance and importance, only a few people in India know of this very valuable relic of Indian Christianity.